President Kennedy's last legislative action saw the creation of comprehensive community mental health centers. Senator Ted Kennedy's joined his famous voice with his son Patrick's to call for parity in treatment of physical and mental health as his final act. More than 50 years later, we come to revive President Kennedy's and Senator Kennedy's hopes for America. For surely he did not envision as places of healing the homeless shelters, juvenile detention centers, jails, that too often house those who deal with mental illness and addiction in our days. Surely he did not foresee the woods and the dales of Woodbridge, Virginia, where I serve, as places for 500 homeless people to bear the cold of winter. If they were not ill when they came to pitch their tents, they surely are mentally ill when they leave. Perhaps the reason we have not implemented the bold initiatives of yesteryear, because our vision has grown weak. Maybe our dreams fade because our faith has grown narrow. We are gathering today in these darker days of winter, knowing that darkness cannot drive out the dark. Only light can do that. Let us be the light of hope and a generous faith. Then the dream will never die.
Amen. Amen. Thank you very much, Father Creighton. It's been a blessing to me in my life to always have to go out to St. Luke's as a young boy and watch you as our parish priest, and then to move on in life and have you such a close friend to not only my late father, but my Aunt Ethel and all of our family. You've been there throughout every up and down that our family has had, and I know you're going through a real time yourself, having just lost your brother this last weekend. And our condolences go out to you. You're such a wonderful human being, and you carry the message of the gospel in a way that makes people attracted to it. It's that same social gospel that my dad believed in so much, and it's the reason why Matthew 25 was on the back of his Mass card when he was buried. That concept of helping those least amongst us, as Matthew 25 said, was the only place in the Bible that talks about salvation. We can find salvation if we help those least amongst us. And as you pointed out, people with mental illness and addiction in our society today and around the world are really the most of the least amongst us. And how fitting we are in this incredible room dedicated in the memory of my uncles and my late father, talking about the mission of social justice that occupied their legislative careers. And their legislative careers were informed by that vision you talked about in your invocation. But not only were my uncles the ones who had that vision. It is said that my late father was one of the truly greatest legislators that this Senate has ever seen. And there is no doubt about that, thanks to his partner in life, my stepmother Vicky, who is not only there for him in life, but has been there to preserve his legacy and enhance it and show so much about what he stood for in terms of the work on a bipartisan basis that was his belief. But when I think about others in this room, particularly the person I want to introduce now, I think about how they are in that same spirit of my uncles. And if you think about anybody that could be put in the same category as my late father as truly one of the most historic and influential legislators in the history of the Congress, our next speaker Speaker Nancy Pelosi will be there. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. I was looking around to see whom you were introducing. I'm very complimented by your very kind and generous words, which I accept on behalf of the members of the House Democratic Caucus who stood by you every step of the way as you built a bipartisan coalition, which was very, very important. I've seen Patrick very close up in his actions in the House of Representatives. We've heard about the passage of the bill, et cetera, but in the Appropriations Committee, every step of the way, never letting anybody forget that this was a priority for us to have mental health parity, to proclaim that we don't judge people for what they cannot do, but respect them for what they can do, and that we lose so much when we don't have that recognition. So it's my honor to join all of you in this room named for giants in the history and the future of our country. To be here with Patrick, to be here with Vicki. I'm glad that we'll be hearing from Vicki because, again, I saw close up what Senator Ted Kennedy was doing on this issue, and so many very special guests who are here who have made such a mark in all of this. So here we are. As I say, Patrick, thank you for bringing this issue out of the shadows. What is our slogan today? No denial. No denial. 2 words. No denial. Almost 2 negatives that make a very strong positive about what has been accomplished because of all of you. Understand that we can maneuver as much as possible here, but without your outside mobilizations in the health community and the people of faith. Thank you, Father, for your beautiful, beautiful, inspirational words. Faith-based organizations, providers of health care in every way. Thanks to Patrick and Senator Kennedy's leadership, our nation enacted an historic, comprehensive bill for mental health parity. You all know that. Thanks to Patrick, we are confronting the challenges and opportunities in this new frontier of mental health and addiction with strength and with clarity. Thank you, Patrick, for your strength and your clarity. Mental health parity is essential to meeting the mental health needs of our loved ones. The Paul Wellstone Mental Health and Addiction Equity Act and the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, have been critical in ensuring that illness in the brain is treated like illness anywhere else in the body. That's an applause line. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Patrick. The Medicaid expansion in the Affordable Care Act has been a powerful tool to fight against opioid addiction, providing new health coverage to 1.6 Americans with substance use disorders. A Republican Ohio governor, Governor Kasich, our former colleague, said, "Thank God for the expanded Medicaid because that Medicaid money is helping to rehab people." I just want to say that the repeal of the ACA and the assault on Medicaid would strip coverage away from millions of Americans with mental health conditions, including addiction. It would cause death, disability, and suffering. In addition to everything else, we would be without the resources to combat America's horrific opioid addiction epidemic. We should be focused on improving health care for all Americans, not just turning our backs on progress. So, Father, thank you for saying that God is with us in this mission. Together, let us work together to ensure parity is fully enforced. Parity is fully enforced. Together, let us ensure providers are held to evidence-based standards and treatment. Together, let us invest in the next round of commitment to the groundbreaking brain research in the 21st Century Cures Bill, so we can help all Americans lead healthier lives. Thanks to the efforts of so many here, I could read off your names. You have been such champions, and your leadership in the agencies of government that you have led, and the testimony you have brought before the Congress to help document and validate the path that we were on. It's now, again, I want to acknowledge Rocky and Cindy, who are here to tell their stories, because it is their generosity of spirit, there's the eloquence of their personal stories that tells it more clearly than anything we can say in our statistics and our provisions in law. So thank you, Rocky, and thank you, Cindy, and we'll look forward to hearing your stories. That's an applause line, too. It's now my honor to present another member of the Kennedy family. She fought shoulder to shoulder with her late husband, Senator Ted Kennedy, to ensure that all Americans have decent, quality health care as a fundamental right and not a privilege. I'll never, ever forget, and we should all take pride in the letter that Senator Ted Kennedy sent to Barack Obama, to President Barack Obama, to be read after he left us. He said, when I came to the Congress, there was a new young president who gave hope to people throughout the world. As I leave, there's another new young president giving hope to the world, and went on. He went on to say the confidence that he had in President Obama to ensure that we would pass the Affordable Care Act. And I think that that letter made a big difference in the scope of the legislation that was passed. And I know that, Vicki, you had to play a role in all of that to ensure that all Americans, again, have decent quality health care as a fundamental right, not just a privilege for the few. Ted Kennedy. Thank you. You're ahead of me there. Ted Kennedy, our liberal lion, is very much on our minds as we fight to defend the progress of the Affordable Care Act. We are deeply grateful to Vicki Kennedy for so many things, for the strength and the inspiration she has been since Senator Kennedy has left us, but for the strength that he drew from her in his life, especially as he was leaving us. So now it is my pleasure and ask you to please join me in welcoming Vicki Kennedy.
Thank you so much, Leader Pelosi, my dear friend. Thank you so much for those incredibly kind and generous words. But thank you most of all for your leadership. The ACA would not have passed without your leadership. You mentioned Teddy's letter, and it was important, but you were the person who continued to remind everyone of those words over and over again. And I was proud to be there, but you were the champion, you were the leader, you were the captain who kept everyone true to those words. And I thank you, and I know that you're going to keep everyone true to those words going forward. I saw my Senator, Ed Markey, here a few minutes ago, and I would like to just, there you are, Ed. Thank you so much for being here. And our nephew, Congressman Joe Kennedy. Joe, I'm so glad that you're here. Father Creedon, thank you. Dr. Satcher, Patrick and Amy, my dear, dear Patrick and Amy. You're going to hear from a lot of people today, and I just want to say in a very, very brief way how proud I am of the work that Patrick continues to do and how much his father loved working with him. He said every day that one of the greatest honors and privileges as a father that he had was being able to serve in the Congress with his son. He said you held his feet to the fire on mental health parity. Oh my goodness, did you? He was passionate about it, but you never let him forget that it was going to be at the forefront of the agenda. There wasn't a phone call that you had. There wasn't a meeting that you had that you didn't say, Dad, what are we doing on this? Let's do this. He respected you. He cherished your political instincts and your thoughts on how to get things done. And what a joy and pleasure and sense of pride it was when mental health parity was passed. So today, as we kick off this day, I wanted to give you a little gift. So, Christmas wrap I thought was appropriate. So come on up. Amy, you come up too. All right, so let's open it for everyone. I didn't want it to break. All right, take off the label of that. It is very protected. It is upside down. All right, we're going to take it off. I know, I wrapped it way too well, but I didn't want it to break here.
Beautiful. It's unbelievable, Vicki. This is unbelievable.
The pen and the photo. Patrick, the president, his dad. The pen that signed mental health parity. The bill.
Thank you.
More than I can say. Thank you, Vicki.
It means so much to me. Really means so much to me.
You should have.
Thank you.
Here you go. I'll clean up the trash. Here you go. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vicki. In regards to cleaning up the trash, I could go anywhere with that. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll never forget, Senator Markey, how much you've been carrying on my father's fight as the senator for Massachusetts. You have been the stalwart of addressing this opiate crisis. Your legislation to expand medication-assisted treatment, which is the evidence-based treatment for opiate addiction, is unparalleled. And we are in a different place in this country because of the work that you did to pass the CARA Act and the Cures Act, and follow all of that with good implementing regulations. So, as I introduce you, because this is also about a message, and the message is all of the work of the Cures Act, which was passed on a bipartisan basis, the 21st Century Cures Act, the CARA Bill, the Comprehensive Addiction Recovery Act, and the final implementing rules of the parity law, all of which are bipartisan pieces of legislation, all of the implementing regulation was halted on Saturday. All correspondence and sub-regulatory guidance was halted on Saturday. Every proposal to implement those bipartisan bills that was put on the Federal Register for final implementation was listed so that the new administration could consider repealing the very implementation that was part of the bills that were passed on a bipartisan basis, including legislation that Senator Markey authored. So that's why we're here today, and that's why we're so honored that we have someone in the Senate who's carrying this fight forward, Senator Ed Markey.
Patrick, you know, you actually do have the litany of saints here today. You have Vicki, who with Teddy fought for so many years for the passage of this historic legislation. You have Nancy Pelosi, who I always say she's Marin on the outside, but she's Baltimore on the inside. And when we had to get the final votes for the Affordable Care Act, in fact, she invoked Ted Kennedy's name in every meeting, that we had a responsibility to fulfill this goal, this promise to America. And here we are in the Kennedy caucus room. It's been a promise for generations that exists now because of this Kennedy family legacy. And Joe Kennedy is here, a superstar on the floor of the House of Representatives every single day, continuing this tradition, almost like a baton that has been passed generationally. And he is that same person, you know, that all of the preceding Kennedys have been advocating and implementing important healthcare legislation. And it's great to be here with Amy and with Patrick, because I just came because I wanted to thank you, Patrick, for bringing us all here today. In a world which is so dark for so many people because of addiction and mental health issues, Patrick Kennedy is a beacon of light. Every day, he lets those struggling with mental health conditions and addiction know that help is on the way. Decades ago, when people were saying incarcerate, Patrick was saying integrate. In Congress, he led the charge for parity laws and to raise awareness for a comprehensive mental health care system. No one leads more bravely and with so much compassion as Patrick. And we need Patrick's leadership now more than ever, because now we're in the fight of our lives, not simply because we have to demand true implementation of our parity laws, but because Republicans want to take away health care for millions of Americans. When Republicans say they want to repeal the Affordable Care Act, they are talking about repealing hope. Just look at the Affordable Care Act's Prevention and Public Health Fund. It is the federal government's single largest investment in prevention. Until the creation of this fund, our country spent billions annually to treat chronic diseases such as asthma, diabetes, and mental health conditions, but invested very little to preventative efforts to reverse these trends. Repealing the Affordable Care Act would end that funding and send us back in time when we ran a sick care system and not a health care system here in the United States. And repealing the Affordable Care Act would reduce Medicaid payments to states, and that Medicaid funding right now provides 1 out of every $5 for substance use disorder treatment. The repeal of Medicaid expansion would rip coverage from an estimated 1.6 million newly insured Americans with substance abuse disorders. We all know what happens in the scenario when states can't find that money. The most vulnerable among us, the ones that need the most help, the ones without a voice, are the ones who will suffer the most. We've made too much progress to go back again. We need an administration willing to enforce our parity standards. We need an administration that says, yes, we need comprehensive reform of treatment and diagnosis for mental illness and substance abuse disorders. We need an administration that believes in and supports equality in the mental health and addiction communities. I am proud to stand here with Patrick Kennedy in this fight. He embodies the change we want to see and to be. There is no one better to lead this movement, and I thank him every day for everything that he does in order to make this a reality for millions of families around this country. Now let's get to work and make sure that his bill becomes something that all Americans will be able to benefit from.
Thanks, Eddie. Have a great day. I really appreciate you being here, really. So my dad always said, when you have someone of the stature of a Nancy Pelosi in the room, or senators and the like, don't miss your opportunity to give your message, because you don't know how long they're going to be here. So we got a whole program today, but for the benefit of the speakers, got a lot to do. I want to just encapsulate what our message is, because it's key for her and our members in her caucus to disseminate the idea that they're still leaders in their communities, even though they're not in the majority in the House. And they can have a profound influence on public policy in the way they organize their own community around these issues in their own states. We're going to fight the ACA repeal, but we also have to be realistic that if the default mode of Republicans goes into effect and they essentially block grant health care back to the states, leaving it once again to an old, tired theme of justice depends on geography, the very concept that my Uncle Robert Kennedy fought so hard to end when he was Attorney General and when he ran for President of the United States, that we ought to get ready in each and every state to fight this fight. And just because these are federal lawmakers doesn't mean they can't be helpful in fighting this at the state level. And we're going to hear soon, Madam Speaker, from the New York Attorney General's office, which has been very successful in fighting to implement mental health parity by addressing the denials that are unfair because they're not comparable to the denials that are currently on physical and surgical care as required under the parity law. We want to replicate that across the country. The only way we can do so is if we have consumers like Roxanne and Cindy sign up and be faces and voices of recovery. Show that they are no longer going to allow this denial to affect people personally. But the appeals process for insurance companies buries people in paper and leaves them nowhere to turn. We want to launch this parityregistry.org, which is on all of our handouts for our New Frontier of Mental Health, because the New Frontier is breaking the shame that we have as individuals who suffer from these illnesses and saying we're not going to allow ourselves to be stigmatized. We're no longer going to allow ourselves to have a separate and unequal system of care because they carve out mental health and they don't reimburse it the same as they do other physical care. And we are going to band together with leaders like David Satcher, who knows what it is to fight a civil rights fight, and say that we as individuals with mental illness addiction have to come to our own spiritual realization that we're not going to be treated this way any longer. We're going to sign up to this parity registry and say no more denial. And we're going to use those folks like Cindy and Roxanne to go to the attorneys general in each of the 50 states and have the support from our friends in organized labor and have the support from others in healthcare and those who want social justice so that we can get the pressure brought to bear to get this law implemented. Now, insurance companies may not like what I'm saying, but frankly, they know also that mental health is the force multiplier for reducing overall health care costs. It's a bureaucratic inertia that makes them deny. I think they've kind of got a pre-existing condition, Dr. Satcher. It's actually a chronic denial condition. We've got to treat it with a little dose of reality and a little help from our attorneys general to bring some real treatment to people who are suffering. The other thing, Madam Speaker, as I know you have to leave, is if the President of the United States wants to repatriate hundreds of billions of dollars in overseas corporate profits, we in the mental health community are saying today that part of the infrastructure that needs to be paid for with those dollars is to build roads to recovery for those with addiction, to build bridges to a new life for those with a mental illness. And we expect a minimum of 10% of that repatriated money to go to addressing the biggest public health crisis we have as a nation. We also want to say, Madam Speaker, that we want to challenge President Trump to say that if he plans to reduce the top layer of taxes for the very wealthiest in our country and reduce corporate taxes and 15% roughly, thereabouts, he ought to be reducing the suicide rates and the overdose rates each year he's in office. By a minimum of the same amount. If he cares so much, as he said in his inaugural address, about the carnage, and he talks about the Rust Belt, does he understand that the biggest suicide rate is among single middle-class white men who are the Trump voter? And if he's going to address their needs, he cannot be pulling out the rug on the ACA, eliminating all the implementing language of the Cures Act, the Parity Law, the CARA Act, and then get out there and say that he's representing the very people who voted for him to go to office so that he could look out for the interests of middle America. So we will make sure all the members of the caucus have my cousin Joe's whole agenda, because Joe's been the one who has been carrying that fight forward on making sure that we implement parity. But today the message is we're living in denial. And if you think about it, you cannot honestly say, with the escalating suicide rates and the escalating overdose rates, at a time when every other illness is going down, that we have a crisis. That if it were a tornado, as we've just seen in the news, if it were a hurricane or a flood, we would have FEMA and be throwing billions of dollars at helping those affected. And yet every single day in America, tornadoes of addiction are ripping through American lives, leaving families destroyed and desperate for help. And who's there? We have to be there to answer that call. And so it's my honor to recognize, I understand, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. Oh, there he is, my senator from Rhode Island. And let me just say about Senator Whitehouse, we all know of his work on the Comprehensive Addiction Recovery Act. And not only has he been a personal friend, a really good friend to me, but I loved serving with him. And I love the fact that he's representing me and the rest of the country so well on these issues, Sheldon Whitehouse.
Thank you, Patrick. It is so good to be here with you and your family. And we even named the room for him just for this. Joe, how are you? Madam Leader, good to see you. I just want to say three things to all of you. The first is thank you. It took the recovery community coming together across the board to get CARA passed. 5 seminars, 3 years, bipartisan support. The effort is what made it work. It takes sometimes careful preparation to lay the groundwork for something big to happen. And it was your effort at that careful preparation that made this possible. I got to have my name on the bill. You made it happen. So thank you. The second thing that I want to say is that we tend to focus on policy, on funding, on legislation, on rules here in Washington. But there's a point that we must not overlook in all of this, and that is that we have to take away the stigma from addiction. We have to first celebrate the incredible progress that has been made on that front already. I mean, we are really, really winning on that. And we got to also recognize that, like many areas of progress, we're not done. There's still more to do. But we need, as a community, to celebrate the courage, the honesty, and the persistence that it takes as human characteristics to stay with recovery. What people do in recovery is something that reflects some of the best parts of human nature. We should be proud of it. We should celebrate it. And the last point that I want to make takes me back to the Washington stuff, which is that we passed CARA, both sides, huge bipartisan vote, everything great. We were able to get a significant chunk of money into the end-of-year spending bill, $500 billion. That's pretty serious by pretty much any standards. But for reasons that I do not presently understand, we didn't connect the new spending to the CARA bill. Somehow, some of our colleagues thought it made it easier to spend the money if you didn't connect it to the new bill that they had just voted for. Our new nominee for Secretary of Health and Human Services voted for both CARA and the spending, but not connecting the two. I don't get it. We need to make it our legislative purpose, when the promised second tranche of spending comes, that it will be connected to the CARA bill. That, more than anything else, will bring those provisions to life when they're funded. And frankly, it makes no sense to authorize something big with one hand and spend without reference to that authorization with the other hand. So our job is not done. I'm still fighting in these trenches. That is our big fight. If you can bring the same success that you brought to getting CARA passed with that extraordinary bipartisan support to the question of getting that second tranche of funding passed, connected to CARA, then I think we can look back on this episode and say, faithful servants, well done. Thank you so much. See you, pal.
Thank you. I want to thank the senior senator from Rhode Island, Senator Jack Reed, for being here. If you'd all turn around, just wave to our Senator Jack Reed. Thank you so much, Jack, for showing up for the team, for the delegation, And thank you, Jack, also for your service to our country in uniform. Part of what we're talking about today in making sure there's no denial to those who are seeking treatment from their employer-sponsored health care is that the majority of those who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan were civilian soldiers returning to their employer and their employer-sponsored health care when they got back from war. And so when we talk about making sure that there is no impediments to getting access to care through your employer-sponsored health plan for mental health and addiction, we're also talking about preserving those benefits for those who may need them because of the invisible wounds of war are taking so many of their lives. I can only imagine if we are successful in putting this parity registry to work, Madam Speaker, to get people to sign up. If we get veterans to sign up for this parity registry like they signed up when the VA was denying ready access to their disability benefits, and they were able to say to their employer-sponsored health care insurer, their third-party administrator, we had no access to mental health and addiction. You want to see a change in the insurance industry's mindset? We're no longer just a bunch of addicts, alcoholics, mentally ill. We're now talking about those that deserve the best from our country, our nation's veterans. And how is an employer going to know amongst those that they insure who's there as a returned civilian soldier, veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan? They have no way of knowing, which means they've got to do it for all, which means that our veterans are going to be the freedom fighters all over again. Because not only did they kick down the doors overseas against terrorism, they're coming home and through the power of their example and all the knowledge that we're gaining of the invisible wounds of war, so to speak, it's an anathema, the invisible wounds of war, they are kicking down the doors of the shame and stigma that comes with these brain illnesses because of our understanding of what they're going through. And now they can kick down the doors of denial. And so that is our message, and when we're going to give a whole template for each and every member of your caucus so they can go back to their districts. We have tremendous leadership. And Paul, I so much appreciate Paul Tonko from New York has been just a champion in the House for these issues. Stand up, Paul. I just want everyone to know who you are. But we're not going to get there if we don't have this template. And this template's being set by the New York Attorney General's office. I want to introduce Lisa Landau. She has been the person who's moved this fight from just being an anti-stigma fight to an anti-discrimination fight. And back in the civil rights movement, which Dr. Satcher was part of, it wasn't as if people cared about whether you agreed with civil rights or not. You had the law now to obey. So we may not be able to change minds about whether these are real illnesses or not, whether it's a moral failing or a medical failing. It doesn't matter, because it's the law of the land. And we can put all the NIH directors, many of whom we have here today, to help address this myth that it's not a physical issue. But it doesn't matter. We've got the law on our side. So I want to have Lisa kind of give us a sense of what they've been able to do in New York. And keep in mind when you hear this, that people in New York are not the only ones who have been subjugated to this kind of denial. So what's happening to the rest of the 49 states, and who's protecting those people? Lisa, could you please come up? Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Let me pick this down for you.
Oh, thank you. I guess I am a little smaller. Oh, that feels so much better. Thank you so much, Patrick, and thank you, everyone. I'm humbled by the many who've spoken this morning. And on behalf of the New York State Attorney General, Eric Schneiderman, thank you for including us in this important event today. We, too, of course, view the issue of access to mental health treatment as not only a crucial public health issue, but as Patrick says, of course, a key civil rights issue. So we echo Patrick's concerns, and we join as partner to him and to the Kennedy Forum and to all of you here today in continuing to use and to build upon the parity laws as enforcement tools to ensure that Americans in need of mental health treatment, including substance abuse treatment, can access that necessary care. While the federal law passed in 2008, thanks to Patrick and others here, require health plans to cover mental health services and substance abuse treatment, unfortunately, we found in New York that there's not been full adherence to these laws. And that is my role here today, to tell you a little bit about how we in New York have used the tool of the parity laws to move this ball forward. So we've been pretty busy in New York on the topics we're discussing, and we began our office prioritization of mental health first as an urgent matter of public health. We looked at the statistics on clinical need, the fact that the incidence of mental illness nationwide was 18%. We looked at our New York State numbers that only 40% of people with mental illness received treatment. And of the 9% of our New York population that was suffering from addiction, only 11% of that number actually received treatment. And perhaps most important to figuring out a role for our law enforcement efforts was the statistic that 63% of Americans who do not receive mental health treatment cite insurance or cost as the reason. So we rolled up our sleeves and we looked at our internal data to figure out our plan. And we especially looked at the fact that we are in the midst of an opioid epidemic. And we found an alignment with the need at large. We had hundreds of consumer complaints regarding health plan denials of coverage within our midst. And that speaks to Patrick's discussion of the need really to have data at your fingertips to ensure that you have something to look at to figure out what the problem is, because this is such a difficult issue for families to address one by one. So we analyzed our data, our complaint data, and we picked top offenders. And what were we seeing? We were seeing plans that were conducting more frequent and stringent utilization reviews, resulting in unwarranted and disproportionate medical necessity denials. We saw that plans were excluding coverage of residential treatment for behavioral health conditions, while at the very same time covering skilled nursing care, the equivalent level of care for medical surgical conditions. And we were seeing that plans charged consumers higher copayments for behavioral health treatment than for primary care medical visits. So the evidence provided from these investigations of 7 health plans gave us the ability to make major settlements with plans including MVP, Emblem Health, Excelis, Beacon Health, formerly Value Options, Health Now, Cigna, and just last week, Anthem. These settlements cover over 4 million people in New York State alone, and some of our settlements are national in scope. We've returned millions of dollars to consumers as restitution when health plans illegally denied them coverage. And you can imagine that while some families have mortgaged homes and taken out money from college savings accounts, others haven't been able to be so lucky. We provided that restitution, and we imposed $3 million in penalties to the plans. But most important, these settlements achieved key reforms in the administration of behavioral health benefits in our state. Plans are now covering residential mental health and drug treatment and have revised their medical management practices. They have revised their medical management practices to ensure that the triggers for review are the same for behavioral health as for medical services. Plan denial letters are now more specific and informative, include appropriate criteria, and copayments for outpatient behavioral health treatment are now in line with the primary care copayment. Additionally, plans have removed caps on nutritional counseling for eating disorders, and our most recent settlements with Aetna and Cigna eliminate prior authorization for medication-assisted treatment for opioid use disorders. And once we enter into these settlements, we have to oversee them, and we make sure that the health plans that we settle with are really adhering to our settlements in a way that they hadn't been adhering to the federal and state laws. And we have seen that New York State plans that we've settled with are imposing fewer barriers to treatment. Plans are denying coverage for treatment at a lower frequency, most notably for substance abuse disorders. For example, the denial rate for inpatient rehab for a major New York health plan decreased from 50% in 2013 to 2% in the third quarter of 2016. The bottom line is, as a result of our settlements, more consumers are able to access coverage for mental health and addiction treatment. And clearly, more needs to be done nationwide to make parity a reality. We encourage other enforcement agencies, in particular state attorneys general and insurance departments, to enforce the parity laws that our legislators have brought to us, and offer some suggestions today. First, it's important to have an accessible mechanism for consumers to lodge their complaints about health plan practices, so you have something to work with. In addition to assisting the individuals, the complaint lines can help regulators identify patterns of health plan conduct that may constitute parity violations. Also, agencies should look for red flags such as fail first requirements, stricter pre-auth requirements for behavioral health services than for medical services, and higher denial rates for behavioral health services. Agencies should also regularly require health plans to explain in detail how their practices, in particular medical management, the big black box, comply with the parity laws. All of these straightforward efforts can move the ball forward. So thank you, Patrick, for all of the work you and the Kennedy Forum does to ensure that mental health and substance abuse treatment is available to all. This is such important human rights work, and we are happy to partner on our shared goal to end unequal treatment for persons grappling with health and addiction issues. New York stands ready to assist other states in this battle for civil rights under the law. So thank you very much for having us here.
Excellent job.
Thank you,
So
Patrick.
helpful.
Let me just take this away.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Excellent, excellent way of explaining. And you see, Madam Speaker, there's no right of action for individuals in many cases. The appeals process is so cumbersome, and by the time they try to appeal, even through the courts, it's next to impossible. So the idea of working with these attorneys general is that if we can show enough folks are getting what they suspect to adverse denials, then we can give this to these AGs and say, go do your job. And if you need to know what your job is, here's Lisa's number. Here's Lisa's. But as Lisa said, disclosure is everything. There's no way for us to know whether the parity law, which requires a comparison in medical management practices between medical, surgical, and mental health, is really comparable if we don't have the data to make the comparison. So I just want to let those who are from the insurance industry here know we want to work with you to make that possible so that this can be addressed proactively rather than retroactively. But I am honored today. Joe, you all right with this? It's about to introduce my cousin Joe, Senator McCain, Chairman Upton. But it's an enormous honor to have you, Senator McCain, who my dad loved working with and respected and admired so much, as do the rest of us and the rest of this country. Thank you, Senator McCain, for being here.
Thank you so much for coming.
Well, thank you, Patrick, and thank you all for being here in the Kennedy Caucus Room. I think it's very appropriate, and I always have to tell one of my favorite Ted Kennedy jokes, and that is stories. One time I happened to wander by the floor of the Senate, and I saw two freshman senators, one Republican, one Democrat, in a bitter argument about something parliamentary. So naturally, I went over and took the side of the Republican freshman senator, and who comes out of the cloakroom to take the side of the Democrat freshman? Then Ted Kennedy. So pretty soon, Ted Kennedy and I are nose to nose. The two freshmen have fled the floor of the Senate, and finally we got it somehow. It ended, and we were walking off the floor, and Ted put his arm around me and said, "We did pretty good that time, didn't we?" One of the great honors of my life was to spend time in the company of Ted, who had a great love of this country. And may I just tell one other story, and I apologize. I apologize. In my declining years, I have given the story, but I was given the Profiles in Courage Award along with Russ Feingold. Ted said, "You've got to come to Massachusetts, to Boston, to receive it." It happened to be my son Jim's 6th birthday. I said, "I can't. It's just my son's birthday. I can't." He said, "Bring him, bring him." We brought him. We landed at the airport. There's a police escort. lights flashing, sirens going as we come from the airport over to that hotel that's right on the water in Boston. We get out, guess what's there? A Coast Guard cutter. We take him on board the Coast Guard cutter, take him all around Boston Harbor. First luncheon, and now we're going to sing happy birthday to Jim McCain. Big cake, about 500 people, we're all singing. I tell you, the kid, it's still his happiest memory that So I didn't come here for that reason. I came here to thank each and every one of you. I thank you for this fine young American who has devoted literally his life to a cause. And that's in keeping with the tradition of a wonderful family, even though they were wrong most of the time. So I want to thank you. This is a cause worth pursuing. It's a cause worth believing in. This is a very troubled world that we are in. Politically, as you've seen just in the last few days, we have a divided America, and I'm sorry about that. But we must unite on this issue. The obligation of all of us is to help those individuals who cannot help themselves. So I want to thank you. Everybody in this room had something else to do today besides be here. You are here for a cause, but you're also because of the leadership of this great and wonderful person. So you can count on me, and you can count on a lot of us. And I guess it was Winston Churchill once said, don't ever, 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 ever give up. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you so much for that. Now you're up, Joe. Try to top that. Yeah, I know you're going to introduce Fred. So I figured I'd give my cousin the honor of introducing the chairman of the committee, as it was then, but the chairman of a subcommittee. I know he's chairman of something now. It's just with his number of years in this place, he's a leader not just in seniority, but in the cause and his commitment to this cause. And we really appreciate having someone like Fred Upton, Chairman Upton, work on this cause with us in the spirit of Senator McCain and what he was talking about. But to do that introduction, I'm going to introduce my cousin Joe, who, as you know, needs no introduction because he's been given lots of kudos from every previous speaker. But I'm just so honored that he is doing this, because he is the one who's carrying the leadership on the parity issue and setting the bar on all the things that need to be set with expansion of coverage, expansion of enforcement, everything. Joe's the first one on all of those bills. So Joe Kennedy.
Awesome. Thank you.
Patrick, thank you. It is always an honor to be with you. I cannot thank you enough for all that you and your team at the Kennedy Forum have done for me as I've been trying to dig into this issue. And the good news for me is that you're my cousin, so you have to answer my phone calls. The bad news for you is that there have been an awful lot of them, and there will be plenty more. If it feels to you like as you walk these halls that you never left, it's probably because at least twice a day somebody comes up to me and says, "Hey, Patrick, great to see you." Which after 4 years here, you'd think that you could get through a little bit, but it still happens literally every single day. So if you're going to sign on to a bill or something, just let me know afterwards so that my staff can track it down. It is a real honor for me also to be here with Leader Pelosi, who has and continues to set an example, I think, for all of us, regardless of party, as to what politics is supposed to be all about. When I first got here, just as a very brief aside, I went around and talked to a number of senior members, Democrats and Republicans, and a Republican that had been here for an awfully long time. Television was on, and we were watching the floor, and Leader Pelosi was speaking. And this Republican remarked at the extraordinary leadership and career of Nancy Pelosi and said that while they did not often agree on the issue, that she built up her political capital to spend it on the causes that she believes in. And I could not agree with him more, and I could not think of a higher compliment from somebody across the aisle to recognize about an extraordinary political leader. So, Madam Leader, thank you. So to everybody here this morning, Vice Admiral Murthy, Dr. Satcher, Dr. Volkow, advocates from all over the country, the reforms that we enact here in Congress will always be guided by your insight, your advocacy, your experience, and your communities. In the months ahead, we will all be relying on you more than ever, and I hope that you won't continue, or that you will continue to raise your voices as we need them now more than ever. Every person in this room has their own reasons for getting involved in this country's mental health debates. Many are deeply personal, some professional, and each of you, I'm certain, can name the moment, the experience, the person that inspired you to make this cause part of your life's work. For me, much of that actually began during my time as an assistant district attorney in Massachusetts, where case after case, person after person, family after family, you realize that our criminal justice system has become a catch-all for our mental health system's shortcomings. I remember very clearly, I had been in the office for about 6 months. It was a late Friday afternoon. We had finished with the arrest of the day, and another one came in, and I was running into the courtroom as the new DA in the office. And I got stopped by a family, presumably a mom and dad, and this gentleman said, "Hey, I want to talk to you about my son. He just got arrested." I said, "Well, sir, that's fine, but you probably want to talk to a defense attorney, and I'm the prosecutor." And he said, "No, I want to talk to you because I want you to hold my son without bail." His son had recently returned from fighting overseas, and he'd gotten addicted to OxyContin. He had stolen and sold almost every piece of jewelry that the family owned, and the dad wasn't certain what he would do if he were to continue to go without treatment. He had called around and he had found a bed for him on Monday, and the only thing that he could think to try to save his son was to have him arrested for stealing from his parents. This case that gets called, and this young man, probably now younger than I am, stands up in handcuffs. And he turned to the judge and he apologized. And he apologized to his family. And he said that he wasn't certain what he would do if he were released that afternoon. That young man was held without bail, and as far as I know, went off to treatment on Monday. I am certain that each of you have your own story that you can tell about the devastating human cost of our country's broken mental health system, how the more vulnerable you are, the more havoc it wreaks. We hold these experiences and the people in them in our hearts. We share them publicly and privately to underscore the urgency we face in confronting this crisis. We back them up with the statistics, the cold, hard facts that cannot be dismissed. That 1 in 5 Americans will suffer from mental illness this year. Of those, half will not receive treatment. That in my home state of Massachusetts, opioid overdose deaths have nearly doubled between 2013 and 2015. Yet over the past 3 years, almost 1/3 of community health providers closed their clinics. Our statistics, our journeys, bridge partisan divides. They span urban centers, suburban neighborhoods, and rural villages. They guided our colleagues on the Energy and Commerce Committee as we debated reforms that would address the badly broken system over the past years. And they were a foundation for the legislation that passed both chambers and was signed into law this year. That bill, guided by Chairman Upton in the back, was a critical first step in smoothing some of the jagged edges throughout our mental health system. But let's make one thing very, very clear. Those mental health measures, passed and approved by Congress last year, were not the comprehensive reform that we need. And if we treat them as such, we will leave millions of patients without access to the care that they need. So if Congress wants to make good on its shared commitment to mental health reform, we have an awful lot more work to do. We need to preserve and expand the Affordable Care Act, not repeal it. Leader Pelosi up here applauding furiously. Thank you. We need our insurance companies to comply with existing federal parity laws, as Lisa so well indicated. Before there have been violations, not afterwards. We need insurers to publicly disclose their rates and reasons for denials in ways that patients and their families can understand, not in a way that confuses even the most well-versed policy experts. Right. We need to increase Medicaid reimbursements, not block grant a life-saving program and rollback expansion. Right. We need to finally treat depression the way we would a broken leg, provide care for substance use disorder urgently as we would as heart disease. And that's why we need to be armed not just with our stories and our stats, but with the credibility of each and every one of you in this room. Because lifting this issue above the political fray requires objective expertise from the professionals who dedicate their lives to this cause. We need you to invite your own elected officials at every level of government to your community health centers, your inpatient facilities. We need you to help add their faces and their stories to those statistics. We need you to illustrate in a concrete way the way that the Affordable Care Act has strengthened the entire continuum of care, from earliest stages of intervention through those moments of crisis. Because when you, your colleagues, your patients raise your voices, people in Washington listen. It has been one of the privileges that I have had in my time in Congress so far to serve on the Energy and Commerce Committee with a Republican chairman who listens. Despite the fact that we are on opposite sides of the aisle, there is not a Democrat that sits on that committee that I have ever heard utter a word of criticism for Mr. Upton, which in this day and age is a rarity. That respect is well-earned and well-deserved, particularly on this issue, where he has been a passionate and eloquent advocate for mental health reform for an awfully long time. He also happens to be a huge Cubs fan, which we like to call the Red Sox of the National League. So we see eye to eye on that as well. So, Chairman, please.
Chairman Upton, today we're presenting Navigating the New Frontier of Mental Health and Addiction, a guide for the 115th Congress. And it gives you every single bill that you could ever imagine that would have something to do with mental health and addiction, all of which are going to be filed through your committee. So I thought I'd give you a little primer on what it looks like. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, let me just say from the beginning that actually Patrick and I had a pretty good relationship. I was sad when he left, but it was a great one, a sincere one. We bonded over a number of different events. And it has been a delight to have Joe on the committee. As you know, my 6 years is over as chairman, but Joe has been a very well-respected colleague and one that we have really listened to. And of course, I think, let me just go back to the beginning. Seeing my friend John McCain here, the two of us bonded very closely when Speaker Gingrich asked four of us, John McCain, Paul Wellstone, Henry Waxman, and myself, to chair the effort to double the money for the NIH. And we did. It was a great bill. If you come by my office, you'll see a picture of the four of us with the most heralded American, Muhammad Ali, actually a constituent of mine. He lived about 10 miles from where I did, where I do now. The five of us actually holding a copy of the bill that we were able to get done that President Clinton signed into law in the mid-90s. And one of the tragedies of this place is that that was a great victory, and we didn't see it happen again. Funding for the NIH was pretty much level funding, suffered under sequestration, and until 21st Century Cures, where every member of our committee, I teamed up with Diana to get, but I got to say Nancy Pelosi was a wonderful superstar for us as well to get that bill to the finish line. But we were able to really combine the mental health legislation, which ultimately passed out of our committee last spring, 53-0. 53. But more importantly, we actually got the funding for it in this fiscal year, and it will continue in the next fiscal years as well. And Joe was a particularly great soldier, an advocate, not only for that bill to do it right, but get to the funding and ultimately get the bill to President Obama to sign into law. So I just, I want to say thank you for all being here. We all, sadly, have a story like Joe's that he shared, and I'm not going to share mine, but it's just as sincere. And treatment, not tragedy. That ought to be the theme. So, God bless all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to acknowledge Rep. Schneider, who came in. Oh, there you are. I want to give you a book. I know you're, come on up for just a second. I know your district in Illinois is impacted as every other member of Congress's district, and I really appreciate your leadership on this issue and the fact you're here in Congress to fight the good fight. Thank you. God bless you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce Roxanne and Cindy. They are, as we've all discussed, the real ones on the front lines. They're the reason we're here. They're who are going to inspire others to sign up for this parity registry, because when you see them on a video that we're going to post on parityregistry.org, okay, it's on all the information I need you to, you're going to ultimately see in another month or so their stories, so that others who are interested about filling out the questionnaire about where they think they might have been denied have a sense as to why they're doing it and that they're not alone, as is often the feeling of those suffering with these illnesses. So I'd like to have both of them come up and each of them tell their own stories, but together they represent the real story for today, and that is these are the people who have the courage to tell their story, and we need more of them if we're going to win this fight. Roxanne, Cindy.
I'm going to use this thing. Good afternoon. My name is Cindy. I live in Kansas City, Missouri. I've been married for 25 years, and I have two remarkable daughters. The oldest one is in college, and the youngest one is in high school. My youngest one is adopted from Guatemala. On many levels, we are the average American family. We support our chiefs and our royals. I go to church on Sunday, and we work hard to achieve the American dream. I've been a federal government employee. I've been an engineer for the federal government for 25 years, and I've had Humana health insurance since 1992. I stand before you today representing thousands of adoptive families who are courageously raising children that are living with adoption trauma and attachment issues. Like many of them, I have been a family in crisis. I have been on the front line battling for equality for treatment, for parity for my family. Being a mother is one of the greatest blessings that there is in life. And one of the highlights of my life was when we traveled to Guatemala to adopt a beautiful 16-month-old toddler from the poverty-stricken highlands of Guatemala. And while we were celebrating her addition to our family, she was experiencing a very horrific, traumatic loss of everything that she had ever known, the language, her family, her culture, anything. And this was occurring right at a very critical part of her brain development, part of the amygdala, if I say it right, but the brain stem, the part of the brain where the fight, flight, or freeze response comes from. And like many others that have endured abuse or trauma in early childhood, when the brain goes to that fight, flight, or freeze response, it can be very, very scary. There's a huge disconnect between that part of your brain and the neocortex where reasoning occurs. When the brain is in that mode, which is very often anytime they experience any sort of feeling of fear or abandonment or shame, the brain instantly goes there. And I can attest when the brain goes there and somebody that has experienced PTSD at any level and they're in that mode, there's this disconnect. And it's ugly, it's scary, it's very, very frightening. It can be tragic. It can be fatal. Suicide is the ultimate flight. We've worked very hard to get treatment to rewire the brain so that we could develop that frontal lobe where reasoning and coping skills occur. We have been in and out of the revolving doors of acute psychiatric hospitals, and then we were eventually admitted to a consistent and intensive residential treatment facility. But 30 days into the treatment, Humana denied further medical care due to lack of medical necessity. We paid $23,000 out of pocket to finish up the regiment. I fought Humana daily, hours at a time, for months, trying to understand what medical necessity, what is this based off of? Give me some criteria. There was no criteria given. Some of the external reviews were done by geriatric substance abuse psychiatrists. They were looking at my adolescent daughter with adoption trauma. And I had no luck. My last resort was an appeal to OPM. Since I'm a federal employee, that's who represents as the highest level of appeal. So this, for your visual reference, is a copy of my appeal to OPM. It took me more blood, sweat, and tears to put this together than it did my master's engineering project. Yeah, I hear some people laugh. That's really not funny, but it's sad. I cited 5 parity violations: treatment restrictions, lack of disclosure of criteria, lack of network adequacy, inequitable external reviews, and inequitable pre-authorizations. Fortunately, I had learned of the Kennedy Forum, and this Parity Resource Guide, which you can see is tabbed to death, was my Bible during that battle. It gave me the tools and the resources and the lingo that I needed, because it was not something that, as an average American, if you're not in that field, you don't understand the lingo that they're using. But thanks to having that as a weapon that I was able to use for the battle, on March 22nd, 2016, 7 months after the initial denial, OPM overturned denial, and Humana was forced to reimburse me for a portion of that care. And while that should be victorious, and you do feel victorious, it's a battle I should have had to have fought. And that's what's sad. So I stand here, and I came here today because I don't want this to be a battle that other people have to fight. I do want to thank the Kennedy Forum again, and Patrick, I brought some Kansas City barbecue and some fair trade Guatemala coffee as my thank you for you.
Awesome. Great, thank you.
I don't know if I need this.
Okay.
Yeah. My name is Rocky Schwartz, also known as Roxanne, so to minimize confusion. I live in Lebanon, New Jersey. First, before I forget, I want to thank Patrick and all of the staff at the Kennedy Forum who have given me this wonderful opportunity. But it's a very sad one, but I'm grateful to be here today. And I was reminded that I have a lot of supporters in the crowd, so there's no need to be nervous. I've been married also for almost 25 years to my wonderful husband, Keith, who could not be here today with me. Many caretakers will understand that. I am the proud mom of 2 sons who are remarkable and resilient young men who also have suffered from mental illness and substance abuse for the last 6 years. My sister died over 10 years ago at the age of 39 of an overdose. And I am a woman in recovery from alcoholism for over 34 years. Wow. In 1982, when I needed treatment, my parents did not have to take out a second mortgage to get me help. And I also was in a continuum of care for a year, and that's critical to my recovery. It saved my life. I'm grateful to be here today, and I hope that other families will not have to struggle getting the medical care for their loved ones like we have, like Cindy has, like probably millions of others. In the interest of time, I will share just 2 of our 7 insurance denials. 2 years ago, one of my sons was discharged from an outpatient program despite recommendations from the clinical staff that he was mentally unstable and at high risk for relapse. He was 1,000 miles away and was alone at Christmas, 2 days before Christmas, for the first time. He attempted suicide 2 days later. After a 48-hour hospitalization, a judge court-ordered him to more intensive treatment for his safety. The insurance company refused to pay for even 1 day of inpatient care. We paid for 6 weeks of care, and we've lost all insurance appeals for that hospitalization. 8 months ago, my other son was also court-ordered into treatment after first responders intervened on his behalf. The insurance denied his care after 12 days of inpatient treatment. The clinical notes and the 220-page medical record that I had to go through stated that the doctors recommended continued residential stay, literally the same day that the insurance company said he did not need that level of care. We paid out of pocket, and my son is thriving in recovery today. He had asthma when he was a child and frequently needed to be hospitalized. As a matter of fact, we used to beg to let us go home, because Mom was there all the time. Not once was he ever denied the medical care that the doctor said that he needed. And nor was he judged for not caring for his body or blamed for his illness. We have spent over $200,000 in the last 6 years for my son's medical treatment. They're alive today, though. We borrowed against our home, depleted the college savings accounts, and withdrew money from our retirement, which we continue to do today. And all the medical necessity denials were not clearly defined. And as Cindy said, the process of filing appeals is so painstaking. I've spent hundreds of hours writing letters, waiting on hold, researching. Thank you very much for all the information on your website. Copying, faxing, and still lost 7 appeals. And I'm an informed consumer now. I'm a member of the New Jersey Behavioral Health Planning Council. I'm a member of the New Jersey Parity Coalition and of the National Alliance on Mental Illness. I have a lot of resources, and I still lost. I can't change the past, and I doubt that my most recent appeal will be resolved. But my hope is that I can prevent other families from suffering the financial, the physical, and emotional toll that my family has. And I'm one of the lucky ones. I represent so many moms that have lost their sons and daughters to these illnesses. The added stress of fighting for our rights is unconscionable and frankly fraudulent. Thank you.
Fantastic. An inspiration. It was the only time anyone got up, okay? It's because of you guys. Cindy, Roxanne, you're a powerful force, both of you, to be reckoned with. Incredible courage and perseverance on the order that I can tell you the insurance companies were not counting on. In fact, what they're counting on is our own denial about the fact that we could do anything to reverse these decisions. What they're counting on is our anonymity. They're hoping we stay stuck in the church basements and confuse the 11th tradition within 12-step recovery to mean that we can't be citizens of this country and demand our rights as citizens even if we're in 12-step recovery. Not far from this room, the founder of our program, Bill W., testified in front of Senator Hughes's committee about these diseases 40 years ago. And that is why it's so incredible that you are here today to try to encourage other families who've gone through what you've gone through to join you with that strength and make those appeals and know they're not alone. And you saw the resource guide we put together. Imagine when other families get to see and help each other out, just like the NAMIs and Mental Health Americas and the Faces and Voices and the DBSAs, all of them do for each other is know that they're not alone. But this can otherwise be a very lonely fight. But you are giving this an energy, and I can't thank you enough. Let's give another round of applause. So it's now my honor to introduce a terrific friend.
I tell her when no one else is around that I named one of my daughters after her, and that she's my second favorite Nora. And she always asks for a picture of our little Nora. But she has been regarded by Time magazine as in the top 100 most influential people in the world. She is considered the leading expert in the world on brain imaging and addiction. And she leads the greatest effort, the United States' effort through the National Institute on Drug Abuse to research and understand this illness so that we can disseminate what kind of practices are the best interventions to treat the very people we've been hearing about today. Let's give a great round of applause to Director Nora Volkow.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very humbled by this morning, and particularly by Patrick, because I've known him now for 14 years, and when I first met him and I heard him speak, I was in awe about the courage that he had to speak up and address the fact that he himself had dealt with the problems of substance use disorders at the time when, of course, it is very stigmatized. And at that time, he said, we have to create parity for mental illness and substance use disorders. And he says, Nora, it will take time, but we will do it. And 6 years later, he had done it. And he did it. And it made me aware, obviously, what moves the world are people. And we move the world so much more impactful where we can work together. But there are certain individuals that have the capacity to accelerate that. And Patrick is one of them. And Patrick, as a psychiatrist, as someone that has, of course, like many of us, dealt with issues in our families of mental illness, I'm extremely grateful for what you have done for all of us suffering from mental illness and substance use disorders. I represent an agency in the National Institute of Drug Abuse, which is part of the National Institutes of Health, whose mission is to use science to come up with solutions to address problems that are affecting us and to improve the quality of the life of everybody. And I'm very honored also to be here with my colleagues from several institutes from the NIH, with whom we have actually joined forces to try to generate the knowledge that will just come up with the solutions, and just, Patrick, to change the stigma. Because even though, and I completely agree, once it's the law, it doesn't really matter that it's stigmatized or no, it's the law. Stigma interferes for people to seek out help and to get the proper help they need. So it is important to create laws that will ensure that that the treatment will be there when it's needed. But it's also necessary to change the perspective of people on the way that they look at substance use disorders and mental illness. Last year, I was sitting in a meeting on prescription drug use, and President Barack Obama was speaking. And I didn't realize whether I was in a dream or it was a reality, but he was saying, substance use disorders, addiction, is a medical disease, and it should be treated. And criminalization of addiction is not just inefficient, it increases harm from those suffering from these diseases. So yes, we've advanced enormously on our understanding about what happens in the brain of people that suffer from mental illness or drug addiction. We now come to recognize that no, it's not a choice. People don't choose to become addicted. We recognize, like with other diseases, there are very specific changes in the way that the brain functions of those individuals that leads them, in the case of addiction, to lose control over their behavior. And we've also come to recognize that not all of us have the same vulnerabilities than others. Like none of us chooses whether we are in an environment where we're going to have parents that are caring and we're in an environment where that is not there. The vulnerability is genetic, the vulnerability is social. So we do know now that, yes, substance use disorder are medical illnesses. And when we hear stories or what Sandy and Rocky just presented to us, how can we not react with anger? How can we create a system that, despite the knowledge, ignores it? And so that's one of the things that I've come also to realize in these 14 years that I've been working as a government official, that knowledge by itself, if it's not implemented, if it's ignored, is like it's not there. And that's why, again, Patrick, I really thank you for everything that you have done and for all of you who are here in support of the area of science. We have a lot to do, a lot to do. And the testimonials that we just heard are the tip of the iceberg. In 2015, there was a paper by Case and Dayton, the Nobel Prize winner of economy, in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, that said, from 1999 to 2013, there has been an increase in deaths of Americans, even though there's been a decrease in deaths in the rest of the countries with a similar economic development. So Americans are losing despite our advances economically and in science and technology. And when he goes in and reports what is it that driving the increases in mortality among the Americans? Suicide, overdoses, alcohol intoxication, and all of its consequences. So yes, we cannot ignore it. Whether it's stigmatized or not stigmatized, the numbers are overpowering and interfering with the ability of improve the health care outcomes of all Americans. And to make the issue more urgent, both mental illnesses, including substance use disorders, are diseases that inflict the very young and become chronic. So they are the chronic diseases of the young people. These are diseases that they are going to carry all of their lives. So why not prevent them? Why not treatment? It will be cost-effective, and it will improve the outcomes. And yes, we have evidence-based treatments, and I applaud the notion of the importance of actually creating an infrastructure that allow its implementation. But I'm also here with Patrick Kennedy, and I cannot also see that we also have to look into the future. And if your uncle was bold enough to say, in 50 years, we will reach the moon. That was 50 years ago, right? Yes. 50 years ago. And it was 10 years. That
it was 10 years.
10 years. 10 years. And you look at the moon over there, so far away. 10 years to reach the moon. And we did it. So my perspective is, why don't we put the same goals and say, we have the science, the technology, the infrastructure, the will, the extraordinary gift that we have as human beings for being creative and coming with solutions, which have science in our hands. Why can we not put those goals? If we could go to the moon, let's put the goal and says, let's expand the treatment and the prevention, interventions, so we really can transform the opportunity of those suffering from those diseases or that have the vulnerability so they can get cured or they don't have to face it.
Can you quickly introduce your colleagues, Dr. Cook? Just quickly have them stand so that we can recognize them.
I think that they will enjoy to do it.
It's cool. That's it.
It is George Cook and George Gordon.
Nora, if you'd stand up for just a second. If I could have George Coop from NIAAA and Dr. Gordon from NIMH just stand with you. And if I could have Dr. Murthy, the Surgeon General of the United States, come up, and Dr. Satcher. And Dr. Bianchi. The Surgeon General has released a report based upon all of your science. And Nora, you so fittingly recognized the vision is missing from the work that you all do, and the appreciation amongst the general public as to how important that work is. If President Kennedy were here today, I'm sure he'd recognize you as the astronauts of today, because you are leading the race to inner space, to understanding the galaxy of neurons in our brains, and helping to make the connections that can be transferred to all the providers, many of whom are in this audience, as to how to provide the best interventions and treatments so that we can avoid the tragedies. And so collectively, I think all of us should stand and salute and applaud these incredible people. Yeah, let's wait for Glenda for after. Yeah, 'cause he's coming. I'm going to ask Surgeon General Satcher, who was the one that first released the seminal Surgeon General's report on mental health, to introduce our current Surgeon General, who, of course, as all of you know, has just released the seminal report of the Surgeon General's report on addiction. Surgeon General Satcher.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Patrick. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to introduce the 19th Surgeon General of the United States. Now, you know I was the 16th, right? That's when the report on mental health. But I'm delighted to be able to introduce Vivek Murthy, who really, I am so impressed with him and so inspired by him. And for somebody my age to be inspired, it takes Patrick Kennedy or Vivek Murthy. But I've gotten to know Vivek quite well, and really, we are very fortunate to have him as Surgeon General. I met his parents. His father was a practicing physician in Miami, and he would take Vivek out with him in the night to see patients in distress. It's a very impressive family, but so is this 19th Surgeon General of the United States, Dr. Vivek Murthy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I have to say what an honor it is for me to be introduced by a man who is not only an inspiration and a friend, but also someone I consider a mentor, someone who's been an extraordinary public servant to our country, Dr. David Satcher. I want to thank Patrick Kennedy for inviting me here, and much more importantly than that, for your extraordinary leadership, Patrick, over the past many, many years. You didn't have to do all the things that you have done to advance the cause of treating substance use and addiction in America, but you did because you recognized that this was a need that our country has had for a long time, and you recognized that you could play a role in helping to fill that need. And I thank you so much for stepping up to do so. Appreciate it. And to be here also with my colleagues from the federal government is also a great honor. I love the term Patrick used, the astronauts. They are, in fact, the astronauts of substance use and addiction of our age. They have built the platform on which this Surgeon General's report was, in fact, created. So I have all of you to thank for that. But perhaps most of all, I want to thank Cindy and Rocky for the stories that you shared today. You know, I know that sharing what has happened to you not only takes conviction, but it takes incredible courage. And what you've demonstrated today is that courage. I had a mentor of mine many years ago who said, when you stand in strength, you allow others to do the same. And that's what you've done today. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for that. When I made the decision years ago to go into medicine, I thought that I would spend much of my time taking care of people with diabetes and with heart disease. I thought I would sit by the bedside of people who are suffering with cancer and listen to their stories and try to provide comfort. I thought I would diagnose people with unusual and common infections and provide antibiotics to treat their illness. What I never really knew until I actually entered medicine was that I would spend much of my time actually caring for patients with substance use disorders. Because what nobody had told me coming into the profession was that this is one of the most common illnesses and struggles that our patients and our families face. But that hit me very quickly after I entered the profession. And what I came to see is that we had a long way to go in figuring out how to not just treat substance use disorders, but really how to prevent them. And while we had a lot of knowledge scientifically about how to do so, we were far away from actually implementing that. Just a few months ago, I had the privilege of releasing this report that was mentioned earlier, the first Surgeon General's report on substance use and addiction. It is a report that we hope will have lasting effects, and it is part of a sacred tradition of Surgeon General reports. Surgeon General reports have been used for many years to call the country's attention to important issues, and more important than just the attention, they've been used to mobilize the country to action. And that's what we need here. In 1964, my predecessor, Surgeon General Luther Terry, issued the first Surgeon General's report on tobacco, which helped galvanize a half-century's worth of activity on tobacco that reduced smoking levels in America from 42%, where they were in 1964, to closer to 15% where they are now. We still lose nearly 500,000 people to tobacco-related disease, so clearly we have more work to do, but progress has been made. Our intention with releasing this report was to do three big things. One is to call attention to the scope of the problem. We have 20.8 million people in America with a substance use disorder. What is more surprising to people is when they hear that that is similar to the number of people who have diabetes in America, that that's 1.5 times the number of people who have all cancers combined. But when you consider the fact that only 1 in 10 people with a substance use disorder gets treatment, that is unacceptable. Because if you imagine if only 1 in 10 people with diabetes or cancer could get treatment. Would we stand for that? We absolutely would not, because it would be unjust. And it is just as unjust when it happens with substance use disorders. The second intention of this report was to help people understand that we do, in fact, have prevention and treatment strategies that work. Much of this has been written about over the years by my colleagues up here and by many other researchers around the country. So there is reason for hope. And these prevention and treatment programs don't just work to help address people's illness, but they actually help save money. Our treatment programs, for every $1 invested in them, they save $4 in healthcare costs and $7 in criminal justice system costs. Prevention is even more cost-effective. We have prevention programs that save up to $64 for every $1 invested. On the one hand, some people say we don't have money to keep investing in substance use and addiction. And I say we can't afford not to, because we are paying far too much. But the third and perhaps most difficult challenge that we highlighted in this report was the unfortunate stigma that surrounds addiction and the need to eradicate it. This stigma is something that we've all seen in our own lives. We may have only also experienced it ourselves, if we are honest. When I trained in medicine, we were taught in subtle ways, often not even intentionally, that people who came in with substance use disorders and addiction, that it was somehow their fault, that they made bad choices. What we didn't fully grasp and reflect in our practice was that that addiction is not a disease of choice, it's a disease of the brain. And we have to treat it with the same compassion and care and urgency that we would any other chronic illness. But you can't legislate changes in attitudes. We can't mandate that people think differently. People have to be inspired and led by example to think differently. And not necessarily led by people like me or others who are in public positions, but inspired and led by the people they know in their communities, by their family members, by their friends, by the faith leaders that they trust, by the clinicians that they get their care from. These are actually the people with the real power to shift culture and attitudes. And I use the word culture very deliberately because that is what we are seeking to do. Nothing less than change culture, while we also seek to change policy. And when we change how we think about addiction, then we allow people to come forward and ask for help. Then we don't have to fight as hard to get investment from policymakers. Then we don't have to fight as hard to get institutions, including insurance companies, to provide the care that patients actually need. That's the power of changing culture. That's why it's so important for us to eradicate that stigma. You know, I'll say in closing that I know that this is a tough time in America because for many years now, we have felt deep division in our nation. But this is an issue that can and must unite us because either directly or indirectly, substance use disorders touch everyone's lives. We may not talk about it. We may feel shame in discussing the struggles that we or our family members are going through, but those struggles are real and they're there. When I travel across the country, and I have the great privilege of visiting communities all across America, there is never a community I visit where somebody doesn't come up to me and talk about their struggles or their family struggles with addiction. What's different is people tell me that if a member of their family dies from cancer or diabetes, then people are bringing over fruit baskets and dinner for weeks and weeks on end. But as one family told me in particular, when their son died from an overdose, people didn't know what to say. They stopped calling. They didn't come to visit, not because they didn't care, because they just didn't know how to address this issue. They saw this somehow as a disease of choice, as evidence of a character flaw, not as a chronic illness that could touch any of our lives and take any of our lives. So that is a challenge that's before us, a challenge that must unite our country. And we've seen some of that unity in recent years as we've come together to put more funding towards treatment. But we need to do so much more. And if we come together to address addiction as the public health crisis that it is, then we will be able to strengthen communities, rebuild families, and ultimately save lives. And I know that the people who are here in this room are the right people to help accelerate our work on that journey. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here.
Surgeon General, thank you so much for those remarks. Our new president said that he wants actions, not words. He wants the plan. We have the doctors. Surgeon General Satcher, Surgeon General Murthy. If you want an answer to the suicide and overdose rates in this country, let's follow the Surgeon General's reports of Satcher and Murthy and say, it's doctors' orders. We're coming to a close, but as we do, I want to reintroduce my partner in all of this, Dr. David Satcher, who led this whole effort with Parity when he talked about it in his Surgeon General's report, which I was fortunate to join with my father, Pete Dominci, Jim Ramstead, to help get passed. But we are working on a new initiative because understanding the fight that we're going to fight now, where much of these battles are going to regress to the states, and given Dr. Satcher's incredible history as not only as a Surgeon General, not only as a CDC director and a preeminent physician and president of medical colleges, but perhaps most significant, he was part of those who were our new founding fathers, who changed this country permanently when they were willing to go to jail in the 1960s in order to put pressure on government to pass the Civil Rights Act. So he knows what discrimination looks like, and he knows what separate and unequal systems of care for those with mental illness and addiction looks like, and it looks a lot familiar, very familiar to him. And that is why I'm so honored to join him in this cause, because we are creating a center that will act as the spiritual home for the information that you got on how to file an appeal, for the parityregistry.org, for the Parity Track, which is going to be a state-by-state report card so we can keep and evaluate how states are doing against the goal of parity for all, against other objectives that we'll put on that website. And so we're able to do that because of our collaboration. And I can't help but say I never imagined that I'd work with someone who first worked with my late uncle, who was one of the people that this room was named for. And I'll let Dr. Satcher tell that story.
Well, thank you very much, Patrick. Patrick has told me to be brief, and now he tells me to tell a story. But let me say briefly how much it means to me to be in this room. My life was so impacted by John F. Kennedy and the Kennedy family. I was in jail when that famous call was made to Atlanta to get Martin Luther King Jr. out of jail, who was in danger at that time. And that call by the Kennedy family, President Kennedy and Robert Kennedy and others, got all of us out of jail and sent me back to the classroom, which means that I was later able to go to medical school. But let me just say that I had the opportunity to work with Patrick's father, and we worked together on legislation that gave rise to the National Institute for Minority Health and Health Disparities at NIH. And but I think the last time I visited Senator Kennedy was a visit about the legislation dealing with mental health parity and addiction equity disorder. And as Vicki said, Patrick's father listened to him, but they were having this debate about whether the legislation could be passed without dropping the addiction equity part. And Patrick was insisting that it not be dropped. And Senator Kennedy was thinking that to be practical, it might have to be. And for the first time, I told Senator Kennedy that this time I disagreed with him and I agree with Patrick. But they both worked together to pass this legislation in 2008, and that's why we're here. We're here because we have a tremendous opportunity, but we face, as President Kennedy said, great danger and great opportunity. The repeal of the Affordable Care Act represents a great danger. But we have an opportunity to really focus anew on health equity, and especially mental health equity. And it was actually Patrick and not me who first said this is a civil rights issue, and I agree. So I want to introduce you to somebody who heads a center that I'm very proud of and very grateful to Patrick and the Kennedy Forum, and that is the Kennedy Satcher Center on Mental Health Equity, which is a part of the Satcher Health Leadership Institute at the Morehouse School of Medicine. We're very pleased to have the opportunity that we have to work together to try to advance this issue. But I want to introduce the executive director of the Kennedy Satcher Center on Mental Health Parity, an outstanding psychiatrist who's already done landmark research to help us move forward in terms of mental health parity and equity. Dr. Glenda Wren has an outstanding background, but I met her when she was a Robert Wood Johnson Clinical Scholar at the University of Pennsylvania. I had just made a short speech, and she said, you know, I want to come and work with you. And that's changed my life. It's changed the whole institute, and now she's executive director of the Kennedy Satcher Center. Dr. Glenda Wren.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Satcher, and thank you, Patrick, for really everything that you've done. It's kind of a privilege to be closing us out at the end of today because I think it helps us to think about our future. And we do face an opportunity to really collaborate, to use the knowledge that we already have in science and apply implementation science to figure out the best ways to get that disseminated and implemented. But it's not something that we can do with just one approach. So what I am excited about this center is that it builds on the 10-year legacy of the Satcher Health Leadership Institute, the strength of our community-based programs such as the Quality Parenting Leadership Development Program that's now in 13 states as a parenting program led by parents themselves, but in collaboration with child health equity policy initiatives in those states. And our integrated care leadership program, which tomorrow and Thursday will be graduating 11 clinical sites that don't have a lot of resources, and they didn't really know what they were doing. They couldn't even figure out where to find out how should you do integrated care. And we worked with them and taught them how you can learn how to use transformative leadership, how you can make sense of these resources to advance their usual primary care to be collaborative care environments. On top of that foundation, we will be working collaboratively with the Kennedy Forum and establishing policy and policy research priority impact areas, as well as working with local leaders. We've done some incredible work in Fulton County, working with the commissioner to help inform their process of criminal justice reinvestment. All of that is just applying what we already know. We have the tools. We just need the will, the collaboration, and focus on implementation so that we can really see the future that we all share in common. We will be putting together a national advisory board that will help to guide the work of the center, and I am really just honored and privileged to be entrusted with the opportunity to lead this center. I firmly am committed to a lifetime of service to this country. I have a deep commitment to that from just being a young child, and I can really think of no better commitment to a lifetime of service and to advance these causes of mental health equity to really create a world that we all deserve to live in. Thank you.
Do we have the right director or what? I mean, OMG, right? Listen, I have so many people to acknowledge, but I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for one person who took my life and turned it all around. And if I hadn't gone to this place that I'd never been to before, Atlantic City, I heard I would have a lot of fun there. That's what I heard. It was the last place you could ever imagine getting sober from drugs and alcohol. But it just shows you, serenity is peace amidst the storm. And Amy has been my serenity, my peace amidst the storm, and our 4 beautiful children. And the Kennedy Forum is working on the prevention strategy that Dr. Volkow, Glenda just spoke about, and all the other speakers, because at the very root of all of this is the early intervention. Thanks so much for coming.